Let me then, counselor, ask you, what do you make of the President of the United States claiming that he is entitled to damages for the harassment that he received as a result of the court cases brought by governments of the United States? I say governments, meaning it was both state government and federal government that Trump endured during his time away from office. Now that he is president, he wants $230 million.
Well, this is a SNL sketch. A sketch. This is not something that you would ever think could actually happen. There's a famous old Woody Allen movie, I think from the late 60s, where he's the attorney and he's also the witness, and he runs back and forth between the lectern where the lawyer is and the witness box. And it's very funny because he's got on both hats, but it's actually, well, this is it. Even Trump said, wow, I just sued myself, and I guess I approved the settlement. Well, it doesn't really look good. Well, of course it doesn't look good. It's self-dealing in the worst sense, in the worst imaginable way. The way we got here was that there are these administrative remedies, Mark. And so the idea is, let's not clutter the court. If a fair-minded Justice Department or some other administrative agency would simply recognize that there was a violation of the law, and they would simply pay damages. As a lawyer who actually practices day in and day out, all these administrative remedies are usually a joke, Mark. All they do is delay you. They're a trap for the unwary. When you do go to court, oh, you haven't exhausted your administrative remedies. You haven't dotted this I and crossed that T. But he's, of course, turned it on his head, as he always does. Instead of it being for everyone else, actually a slowdown and a means to just deny your claim and waste your time. That's the reality. When you go to the Department of Justice and you say, oh, I think that the prosecutor violated my client's civil rights, they roll their eyes, delay your thing, and then you can eventually go to court and try to make that claim. Many of these claims are very difficult to bring, Mark, because there's this qualified immunity that we've blasted. But of course, qualified immunity protects the government workers and the government system. The fact that you're even acquitted doesn't mean that your rights were violated. That's the beauty of our system. If they don't have enough evidence, you get acquitted. But we have what we call the American rule, not the British rule, which means that in a criminal case, basically, in any case, you pay your own lawyer. The British rule is more that the losing party pays the winning party's lawyer. You can analogize from that the loser in a criminal case, which would be, I guess, the government, where they indict somebody and the person's not found guilty, ought to pay the legal fees of the defendant. But that's not our system. So anyway, Trump has turned all of this on his head. He files an administrative claim. This is actually before he's elected, but he manages to keep this pretty secret. I don't remember this coming out, that he filed it back in the middle of 2024. Of course, Biden and his administration were so scrupulous, they never leaked it. We never knew about it. And now it's about to be acted on. And Trump says, when it's acted on by the Department of Justice to pay me for all these egregious violations of my civil rights, Trump, by being charged in these two federal cases. I think that's what it pertains to, the two federal criminal cases. Yeah, 230 million sounds about right. And they actually are going to try to do this collusive. Talk about that word coming back. This collusive, concocted thing where I guess it's Todd Blanche or maybe Bondi herself will say, yes, I've analyzed this. This is a righteous claim. It's worth $230 million to Trump. Here's where I signed it. And people say this one won't even go to court because the idea is it's an administrative remedy, Mark, short of court. I think if they get anywhere near approving this $230 million or giving any of it to Trump, I think a couple of things will happen. There is going to be an accounting for all of this. And I think Bondi and Todd Blanche, if they're any part of this, are going to lose their bar card, or even worse. John Miller, the attorney general, he went to federal prison under Nixon. That's a real thing for committing crimes, and the statute of limitations would still be in play after Trump's next 3 years. So there's that for them to think about. And I think their bar card, it's just, let me get this straight. And for Blanche, it's even worse. So Blanche represents Trump as his criminal defense attorney. He comes to be the deputy attorney general. He then pays his former client, to whom he has a duty of loyalty ongoing, pays him $230 million because, after all, it was just and obviously a huge amount of that would be for fees. So I guess Blanche would think, how much can I really, how much have I pocketed on this case?
But
if
that's a big
230
thing.
million
I don't want you to blow by that. I mean, a lot of people,
that
or
may include $50 million in legal fees that were
sure,
paid
a
to Blanche.
handful of
That may be a
people
large
stand to
part of
make
the
a lot of
230.
money with this.
And it
Exactly.
may
Go
not
ahead.
have been paid yet, Mark. It may not have been paid yet. I don't really have the money. I'm doing this crypto thing. Todd, I'll pay you. I'm down the road. I know I have an obligation to pay you this $50 million for these old invoices of yours. And then he pays the $50 million. Trump's story is that if he gets the $230 million, it has to cross his desk. So his claim will cross his desk and he will approve his claim to be paid by the taxpayers. But he says to the taxpayers, don't worry about it because I'll give it to charity. Obvious nonsense. The charity that he used to have was shut down because of its violations of the law and not giving the charitable money to any charity at all. And of course, the main charity that is obsessing Trump right now is paying for his big, beautiful ballroom.
Well, that's not a charity, and I made the same point that you just made
He'll try to
yesterday.
figure out a way.
He defrauded a children's cancer charity, okay? To the point that, as David Katz has just noted, he is barred from doing any charitable work in the state of New York. They
And the swing voters knew that. The swing voters knew that when he made him the leader of the free world.
So the idea that he would give a penny to charity is totally absurd. He'll pocket that money. That's what I was saying in hour one. The ballroom appears to be, earmarked for payment from Palantir, Meta, Google. A lot of the crypto bros are going to step up and throw. I'm sure Binance is throwing a lot of money at it. They just got he got that big pardon, the CEO of Binance. So that's
Mark,
a
can I
situation.
just say one thing? So many of them are such nerds. They'd be the skunk in the ballroom. They'd be a skunk at a cocktail party. It's just a bribe. It's just another way to take a bribe and to destroy this beautiful old East Wing. That's horrific. That's happening as we speak.
Well, just because you mentioned that, I mean, he is within his legal powers to destroy that East Wing, but he typically needs to get some approvals to do it, David Katz. But as I was noting in the first hour, I don't mean to laugh, but it's so absurd. There are Trump functionaries in every place where he needs approval. So getting approval is not a problem.
This is how it's done in banana republics. Somebody's brother's-in-law in charge, and they stand up there sanctimoniously. If you followed some of these third world countries, they don't just say, I did what the hell I want, go screw yourself. No, they issue a statement that says this has been approved by such and such an agency. I went through some process, all this kind of stuff. Trump is actually not even doing that very well. He's acting more like the stereotype that we have of the strong man in the banana republic who says, I do what the hell I want, go screw yourselves.
Right. This really is true. You're making such an important point here because I'm seeing, as I've often said, no sleight of hand. Trump is right out front. We will do this because I said we're going to do it. And look, there's no one stopping him. I mean, the leader of the House, Mike Johnson, said, gosh, I don't really know much about what's going on. I know, they have certainly made adaptations and changes historically to the White House. Barack Obama put in a basketball court. They put in a bowling alley, a swimming pool through the years. So I don't really see necessarily why you're giving this president such a hard time.
The bowling alley was underground and not visible. The basketball court was the size of a basketball hoop. Look at this. Just look at it. And, you grew up in Washington, D.C., Mark, and I did for a while. And then I was a law clerk back in Washington, D.C. And, these historic buildings, what a message this sends. All the efforts that we do to preserve historic buildings, the sacrifice that people sometimes have to make because we want to, and they want to make a profit, which they have a right to do. And we balance off their need to make a profit or their investment against the public's desire to have a beautiful place preserved. And where is the concern for preservation here at all? And
exactly.
The ballroom is going to be garish. It's going to be garish and ugly.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it was designed not to be palatial, but to be the people's house. And beyond that, there is history there, as you note, and there were, based on reporting, no historians and those who are, archivists, et cetera, consulted in retaining anything from doorways to windows. All of these things have some historic significance, even allowing for the fact that the East Wing is probably the least historic part of the White House. There's still a lot of history wrapped up in it. And the other thing I'll just say is that as they demolished now the entire East Wing. And this was a promise he made when he was talking about this ballroom, is that none of the White House would be touched. And there in this picture, you see that it is demolished. Now the price for this entire thing, this bloated price to begin with, from $200 million to $300 million. I'm wondering, again, this has to be grift. There is no way you're spending $300 million to build a ballroom. What is that ballroom built of? I mean, it is absurd that you spend $300 million. So I'm suggesting, even in this supposedly privately funded way, there will be money stuck in his pocket. It is a grift.
Private funding of public accommodations like this is a terrible idea. It's an old demagogue's line where you say, I love my country so much, I'm not even taking my salary. We've heard that from a few presidents. We've heard that from Trump. I love my country so much, I'm not even taking my salary. And then, he doesn't take his, whatever it is, $500,000 salary, if that's even true. And then Trump and his family have already made billions, with a B, billions, and he's only been in office 9 or 10 months. I think that's just the crypto grift. So it's a terrible idea because it's an invitation to bribery. And when they pay for these inaugurals that we don't need to have such huge inaugurals and such money spent on the inaugurals, Mark, that's the problem. What I hope happens with this ballroom is I hope somebody runs to court right away and they get a restraining order, because this is the old thing where the landlord, destroys your property first and then goes and asks for permissions later. This is just an old thing that Trump has done. This is the bad landlord, the abusive landlord in Trump. All right. And he did this. First, he made an announcement very publicly that it wasn't going to even be touched. The East Wing was not going to even be touched. And then he came with
it wasn't touched, David. It was demolished. Okay.
And did it that wasn't the particular semantic nonsense that he relied on. His semantic nonsense now is that as they were just about to do it, they realized that it was much more efficient for the plan to just total the thing, to demolish it completely. And so it just was evolving, like 2 days before it evolved, it was obviously done as a cover up. This is just so I hope that some court will restrain this and say that it had to go through those procedures. And that
this is where your job,
Mark, they say that you can demolish, some technicality, you can demolish, but not build. You need some kind of permission, and you don't need that permission to demolish. I want to see that statute. I want to see the interpretations of that statute, which say that you don't have to ask anybody's approval before demolishing.
Well,
just before the new building. I don't believe it.
This is the problem with the law. And now I can say this to a lawyer, a distinguished counsel. The problem is that we've sort of adhered to the law and had a basic understanding that there would be adherence to the law. And so we look to the law and we look to various judicial decisions to, in some way, influence events. I'd suggest respectfully that this crew, under the leadership of this president, who operates really like a mobster, frankly, this is the way, or a king, however you want to put it, an autocrat. He wants something done, and no one will challenge him. Look, I'll go back to the beginning of the administration. It was illegal to have DOJ established as some kind of instrument by which there would be a complete trimming of government, sending them into USAID, EPA, IRS, the Treasury Department, and they're firing people. They are getting rid of people. This is not a government organization. They have no power. But if nobody says anything and nobody actually intercedes, they get away with it. And they did. To me, that's all I needed to see. It was completely grotesque. They changed government and dismantled huge parts of it forever. And they did it illegally. And so the building of this ballroom and the destruction of the White House, in a sense, it's metaphorical for what they are doing across the board in government. And it's being done with complete disregard for legality or illegality.
Senator Warren said that this destroyed East Wing, demolished East Wing, half demolished East Wing, now that you see, is a metaphor for the whole Trump presidency this time around. It's illegal, it's destructive, and it's not helping you. So hopefully the average voters will get it. But let me just come back on what you said a little bit, because the things that I would look at in this back and forth, and it was certainly not good for the challengers. It was good for Trump. But there were public interest groups that went to court very quickly, Mark. They were not like raided or stopped or had their, electricity cut off. They weren't jailed. They were allowed to have, to function as the rights groups that they are. They and their very able lawyers went to court very, very quickly. The unions wish there were more unions in general and more unions in the federal government. We didn't have a union when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. We weren't unionized in the Department of Justice, but like the Treasury workers are. So the unions that existed went to the courts very promptly. They got very prompt hearings. Some of the judges, even judges picked by the Democrats, didn't seem to get it right away. I remember there was a DOJ ruling where the court could have, a Democratic appointed judge, I think she was actually the judge on the January 6th case, instead of issuing a very rapid TRO that would have stopped DOJ from fooling around in the Social Security records and other very private records, she didn't act right away. And in that, that was a case for a temporary injunction. So they didn't have a perfect reaction to all those things, but the Trump administration has lost over and over again in many courts, and there are some things where they haven't lost, where they probably were supported by the law. And there were many things where you could really question the U.S. Supreme Court if they were really following the law as written and as interpreted. And so, yes, there were some judges that didn't act as quickly as they should have, but the cases did get brought to court, like I think this one's going to get brought to court. So,
well, I mean, this one, just because you ended with this one, I'll just say,
sure.
Again, this is a Trump dance. Oh, gosh. Well, what am I supposed to do? Reconstruct the East Wing? I mean, it's
Yes.
gone. Okay. It's sort of like, what am I supposed to do? Bring Abrego Garcia back? He's in El Salvador. I mean, in the case of Garcia, they did bring him back, but there are many other American citizens who were deported as part of this ICE effort, and they're being sent to various countries all over the world and various institutions of deportation and detainment all over the world. And the court cases months later say, hey, you can't do that. That was illegal. Gosh, again, the vase is already broken. Humpty Dumpty, I can't put him back together again type thing. So I don't know, David. And I love this conversation and back and forth we're having because I know you have such great faith in the law, and you should. You're a distinguished lawyer. And I have such a cynical view of the law because I see it unable to handle someone who is essentially a lawless figure with ultimate power over the entire Justice Department. And so we move to the 230 million and we go, gosh, I mean, as you say, there's an absurdity to it, but I don't see how the law restrains it except for what you've said, which is after the fact, people associated with that may actually lose their licenses to practice.
Well, let's just take the East Wing as one example.
Okay.
They go to court, and that's of course what Trump is going to, I broke the vase and now you can't fix it. Ha ha, judge. Wasn't I clever as usual? I was faster than you were. These federal judges have huge power, including to issue injunctions. They can tell him to stop. And if that's the right remedy, tell him that it has to be rebuilt. Maybe if he was acting completely outside the law, as he may have been, use his own funds. Now that's dangerous too, because Trump's, when told to use his own funds, like when he got hit for $500 million in New York, it looks like instead of thinking, I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing, I'm going to be deterred. Trump's mentality is, I'm going to do a crypto grift. I'm going to take so many bribes that I'll be able to pay the $500 million out of my pocket and still have a lot of other dirty money in other pockets. And unfortunately, he gets inspired to figure out ways to take bribes and to do things that are illegal. But, the remedy for something like that was the Congress. We have terrible luck, or especially with the voters and how they voted in certain states, that we don't have either a Democratic Congress or a House. That would be the normal way, oversight hearings by one of those bodies to deal with this kind of, this was a president that the framers saw coming. They saw somebody, like Napoleon, having won an election, never leaving, never abiding by the law. They saw something like that, and they saw the remedy. Actually, Napoleon got reined in by a legislature or parliament, as it were, in France in his era. So this is very much what they had in mind, and how you would rein in kings and tyrants, or would-be kings, since we weren't going to have a king. And tyrants would be that the House or the Senate would do it. They have absolutely abdicated. It is so shameful what the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean,
they haven't stood up for their own institution. They haven't. They've surrendered their own power. That's not something that the framers really thought was going to happen, but we've seen it in our era. So what's the next remedy, Mark? The next remedy is the next election. And I know people are pessimistic about it. We are going to have an election. There's no stopping an American election. The pandemic didn't stop the American election. You have all these civil-minded people in all 50 states. They have deadlines. They gear up. They have the election. They have the vote. And I think the vote will go overwhelmingly against Trump and the Republicans, and that will restore an awful lot of order. Look at the 7 million plus people who went into the streets just the other day, peacefully protest. Think about that, Mark, because they knew how Trump was going to manipulate any kind of violence. Over 7 million people refrained from any violence, and they were totally peaceful. And that is from the determination. They say the vote now for redistricting in California is heavier than the presidential vote. So that's what else the framers had in mind, that when you have a would-be tyrant, the people would be sickened, repulsed, and would stand up to it.
Well, I love that you pointed to the way that the public has been animated. It's a remarkable thing, though, the way so much of the public that now is being affected by awful MAGA policies, farmers, working class Americans, those who are working and living paycheck to paycheck, are realizing that their vote for Trump is, directly affecting them in a negative way. Someone related a story to me. I meant to mention it to everybody, and I'll mention it to you and everybody right now, about the strength of the MAGA belief. This is someone in a friend of mine's family. I've just reconnected with him after a couple of years, and he was saying that they turned down. Now, they live in a trailer in a kind of subsistence living situation, government assistance, this kind of thing. And during the Biden administration checks that relieved a lot of the COVID burden, I think it was. Remember, there were some checks that went out to all Americans. They turned down the check. They didn't want it because it came from Biden. Now, this is a family that is desperate for every dollar just to stay alive. But the fervency with which they feel an allegiance to Trump and the MAGA movement is such that they didn't feel comfortable taking that check. That's the America that we're living in right now, David, and it's a remarkable thing to me, which is why sometimes issues don't matter. It is, again, a kind of, now you could say, yeah, Mark, that's always 30% of the people are always going to be like that. And that might be true, but I'm just trying to speak to the power of the MAGA movement. I think it really is there. But as you've said, things are changing, and the economy and many of the revelations that are going to be sort of set upon Americans may begin to change that arithmetic,
So, Mark, do you want to talk about the Ninth Circuit cases, the Seventh Circuit case, the U.S. Supreme Court on the, sending the, basically violating the Posse Comitatus Act and sending the military into the cities?
I do, but I also want to make a note. Please leave time for me to ask you about the threat to New York voters that Donald Trump issued should they vote for Mamdani in New York. But first, let's start with,
Can I say one thing before I forget? Mamdani went to my high school, the Bronx High School of Science. So he drew to your school. I want all of your listeners to know my bias, going in.
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, more on that as we continue. All right, what is the state of the state on these various deployments that will go to American cities, Portland and the rest?
Well, I think that basically the Supreme Court, the courts are going to do the right thing on this, because the idea that there is an emergency because the president says there's an emergency, that's just not the law. I mean, that's not the law on anything else. We don't have fiats like that. If the tariff case ends up going the way that you think, Mark, and the way the economist bot thinks it will, one of the reasons will be because of foreign affairs, that the president has more power in foreign affairs. But this is something that is it's so inside of what we stand for. This is not foreign affairs. This is whether you can send the military into our cities, whether you can send the military against civilians. And we've had decades and decades of finding that you can't. Ever since the Civil War, especially, people thought this is awful, to send the military against citizens, and only if there's a rebellion, Mark, or an insurrection. There has not been a rebellion or insurrection, and courts decide all the time whether definitionally something happened or not. So what the district judge, who was, I know her, and she was appointed by Trump, but she's a terrific judge. She was appointed during the first term, and I think she was probably better, he thought, than the other people in Democratic blue, two Democratic senators, Oregon. And so he accepted someone who was just terribly smart and middle of the road, and she ruled against him on just what I said, that it was untethered to the reality. It was untethered to the facts on the ground. There has not been rioting on a major scale that the local authorities couldn't handle. That's this. You need to have an insurrection or a rebellion, and it has to be something that's shown to be beyond what can be handled without sending in the troops. So they then went to the Ninth Circuit, and unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit panel was two judges picked by Trump, and it was like a love letter, you know, between Bondi, Trump, and those two judges. Like they all like reading from the same, you know, prayer book, but it's not the law. They said, well, it's up to the president to decide. We defer to his discretion. No, not if there's not if those two elements are not met. If there's not a rebellion or insurrection, and if it hasn't been shown that dealing with it without the army, they could be dealt with without the army. So there was nothing like that in Oregon. Of course, we saw that down in LA. There was absolutely nothing like that. And that decision's still kind of bouncing around. But fortunately, LA's not that much of a problem anymore. I mean, there may be a deployment tomorrow that makes it a huge problem. But most of the Marines have been withdrawn. The National Guard have been withdrawn from Southern California, is my understanding. And so that leaves us with Chicago. And so what's going to happen with those two Trumpy judges is that the third judge, who was appointed by Clinton and is an excellent judge, Graber, she immediately said this case should go to the full court. And because she asked it go to the full court, that started a process going where both sides had to file a brief. They've actually filed the briefs yesterday, Mark. So I think there'll be what they call en banc, which is they get 12 members of the court together, and as a bench, they decide, not the three people picked randomly, but as a bench, they decide. I think there are the votes on the Ninth Circuit to overturn that and to not allow the deployment in Oregon, which once the Ninth Circuit decides that will bar the deployment in San Francisco, and it'll bar it here in Los Angeles. That leaves Chicago, where the Seventh Circuit already decided the way that I just said. They already decided that the deployment cannot be done in Chicago. They may try to get that en banc or take that to the Supreme Court. They've taken one of these cases, the administration, to the Supreme Court. But again, I have confidence in the Supreme Court because there's just simply not a record. And as you watch TV all the time, you know, I keep dreading the fact that there'll be days of rioting. There'll be something that the U.S. Supreme Court, even though it's not in the briefs, you know what I mean? If the whole country is watching this on TV and some areas convulsed by riots that the police really can't handle. But that hasn't happened. And that's why I'm so thankful to everybody out in America who realizes that they're just playing into Trump's hands if they get violent or if they do something at night, you know, and if there are looters and stuff like that. These local authorities have to arrest the looters if they're doing something illegal. They have to prosecute the looters if people are doing violent things. I mean, you know, one of my surmises is that they're provocateurs. They're really nothing but people who want to help Trump. For all I know, they're people who got pardoned by Trump. Am I being hyperbolic? No. Somebody pardoned by Trump, Mark, just threatened to kill the minority leader.
Hakeem Jeffries. Yeah.
Hakeem Jeffries, right. And it was reported in the media that at least the FBI did a good job this time. My understanding is that the FBI did not catch this person, Mark, that this was the state police in New York, which is what I say all the time. The state of New York, Illinois, California, they need to step up to the plate. Don't wait for the FBI to do stuff. There's no reason why every FBI agent who's good, who gets drummed out of the FBI, isn't hired by the California Bureau of Investigation, the New York Bureau of Investigation. Let them fight crime. And another example is, Mark, just while on my monologue, is George Santos. I've been saying for a long time, this is like Paul Manafort. There ought to be a state prosecution as well as the federal prosecution. It is foreseeable that Trump will pardon people that no one in their right mind except Trump would pardon. Or maybe he's not in his right mind. But anyway, nobody would pardon George Santos, the fabulous. He ripped off this guy, took money from some poor guy with some story about his dog. The restitution fell. When Trump pardoned Santos, the restitution order fell along with the rest of Trump's commutation. He doesn't owe the people that he ripped off. He doesn't owe the poor, I think he was a paraplegic, not Vietnam, he's a veteran. He's a veteran. And he swindled this fellow. It's all in the record. It's all in the sentencing. He swindled this fellow. He doesn't even have to pay him restitution. This is a timely case that the state should bring against him for those swindles, and they should put him right back in jail after he gets due process, after a fair sentencing. But from what I've seen of it, he should go right back to jail because 3 months was way too little. Take that from a criminal defense attorney. 3 months for Santos for what he did was way too little.
He took people's credit card numbers and ran up bills to pay for lifestyle stuff for himself. You know what I mean?
And when you take a debit card,
George Santos here.
Yeah, I mean, so
when you take a debit card, the credit card company doesn't lose. The poor guy who usually can't get a credit card, and so he desperately needs that money that's on his debit card. The poor person loses the money on his debit card, not the debit card company. When a Santos like that scams him.
Yeah, no, it's true. I wanted to thank you for visiting the question of the troops and the presence of troops and deployment of troops in American cities. I wanted to speak about the city of New York. The city has already been hit by Donald Trump's retribution associated with the monies that were already earmarked for so many of these various infrastructure projects, from the Holland Tunnel to the West Side Highway, et cetera. I mean, we're talking about almost $20 billion that was directed toward blue cities and blue states that's now been shut down because Donald Trump wants to make a point and basically take it out on the Democrats and the democratically controlled cities and states. But he took it to a different place, and I thought this place is illegal, which is he told New Yorkers that he would withhold funding for New York City if Zoran Mamdani wins the general election this November. And I think, I mean, there's nothing wrong with campaigning for a candidate if you wanted to go campaign for Cuomo or whatever. But I think if you're threatening like that, isn't that like a voter intimidation or of some kind? There must be laws, and I'm certain that there are laws that proscribe against that.
You know, Mark, every week we write the bill of particulars against Trump. How many pages long is it? Of course, you cannot do what he's doing. I mean, you can, I guess, say it. It's a kind of shakedown talk. You know, presidents don't talk that way except Trump. But there's several things wrong with it. One is impoundment. Even if you didn't have that piece of revenge, political threatening, the piece, you cannot impound funds if the money is voted for New York for a certain purpose. And we've had that over and over again with the impoundments. And in fact, one of the things that Congress has been doing to the Democratic minority is what they call a rescission. And a rescission is lawful because you say later on, we, the Congress that voted $5 billion for this project in New York, we've decided we're not going to spend it in New York, and they rescind it. They pass new legislation. If they have enough votes, that is not something good that happens to New York, but that's legal. Trump doesn't want to do that because even with these Republican majorities, he can't get the votes to impound or rescind the funds. So to rescind the funds. So 2 points on that. He just impounds them himself or threatens to impound them himself. That is illegal. Since the days of Nixon, that's been found to be illegal. There's binding U.S. Supreme Court precedent. Don't say to me they changed Roe v. Wade and they did presidential immunity. For all we know, they'll do that. I don't think that they're going to change the impoundment laws. And one of the things that the Democrats want in order to join in, to reopen the government, what they want Trump to do as part of Trump reopening the government, is to have the Trump and the Democrat and the Republicans agree not to do these rescissions, because what they did with these spending bills was they told the Democrats, okay, we're going to share the loaf, we're going to split the loaf, we're going to give you $10 million for project, $10 billion for projects that you want. And then they all signed, they got to the 60 votes. And then the Republicans turned around and said, oh, we want to rescind that. We want to take that back. And of course, the Democrats are saying, we can't run a government like that. We look, first of all, you're always humiliating us. We look terrible with our voters. The further left, the worse we look with those voters. So we said, we have to live with these bastards. So we at least agreed to get $10 billion for something that were our Democratic priorities. And then 2 months later, they took it back. So that's part of the deal that the Democrats want to make to reopen the government, is no rescissions in the future, that what is it made in these compromises, like if they're going to spend $100 billion, let's say, so that the Obamacare subsidies will continue, so people don't have these huge sticker shocks that they're having right now with their health premiums, that, you know, a month from now, they don't say, oh, well, wait a second, we agreed to $100 billion. Well, we're rescinding. We're only making it 50. And can I say one more thing about New York? Because I followed this campaign. You have three fascinating characters, which let you have the floor and talk about.
No. It's please. I mean, this is a real shake it up election. Go ahead.
One is Cuomo, and of course he's very unpopular. And then there's a fellow who has his guardian angels. So this fellow for about 30 or 40 years has run around with a red beret. He's a colorful figure. He's a Republican, so he's had no chance of winning much of anything. But he stayed in the race. And so you have.
Well, I'll tell you a way that he could. I could tell you a way that he could put on a show, Sleewell. If Cuomo drops out, then I think many votes could go to Sleewell. I don't know if he could win, but all of a sudden he becomes way, way more relevant.
Katsadamus, I don't predict.
No, I mean I don't think the Katsadamus, dude. He's a long shot. I don't need Katsadamus on that.
Labdadi's going to win. Labdadi's going to win. Take it to the bank.
Okay. I'm not even giving you credit if that happens. Come on, he's a front runner. But it is a fascinating election, and New York may become a very interesting place, you know, given some of the policies that Mamdani has articulated. And, you know,
people haven't followed it. The Slima on the right, he's the one who wears usually the red beret for his guardian angels. And he didn't wear the red beret, and he's a good speaker. And he had a couple of great lines. Cuomo said, you know, when things have gone up so much since I left. And Sliwa went right in there and said, you didn't leave. You ran away from the impeachment by your fellow Democrats. You didn't leave.
I do hug and kiss people casually.
Yes, yeah, that's if that's the best you can do, the best explanation. I thought Mamdani was brilliant as well. I mean, he pivoted with a lot of Cuomo stuff as well on everything from the incompetence associated with his dominance in New York politics as to COVID handling. You know, essentially the seniors getting a death sentence essentially because of the moving into these retirement homes of people with COVID. I mean, he botched COVID, never really owned it, and Mamdani was there to show him the receipts. And then, of course, the question of his relationship with various religious communities in New York. It was I thought a really fiery debate. And both Mamdani and, as you say, Sliwa, they both really managed it. Cuomo's real high ground from a debate standpoint, it seemed, was these guys don't know what they're doing. You need somebody who really has experience when it comes to running a city of this size. And their retort was, yeah, we've seen your experience. You screwed stuff up in a big, big way. So, you know.
Mamdani's great line, fellow Bronx Science alum, he said, we've experienced your experience. That's why people aren't voting for you, Cuomo.
Yeah, very, very good. Quickly, David, I wanted to just mention that the handing down of a judicial decision about the Pentagon and the book ban at U.S. military schools. I covered it a little bit yesterday, but I just thought it was worth noting. It was kind of, it's a feather in your cap. This is what I mean. I'm the grim one who always says, you know, the justice system isn't going to help you out. They're going to let you down. They're not going to restrain Trump. They're not going to restrain Hegseth. Well, in this case, actually, to your credit, David Katz, or, you know, with your faith in the judicial system, they did restrain the Pentagon. And they said you cannot dry clean the libraries of all of these books that have to do with Black history, with DEI, et cetera.
Well, it's astonishing. Apparently, they run a lot of libraries, both in this country and I guess at some foreign U.S. bases. And so the Department of Defense decides what books are in there. I mean, like, they don't have anything better to do, like make sure China doesn't take Taiwan, like make sure we're doing the right thing in Ukraine. Anyway, they don't have anything better to do than to go through and figure out whether this book or that book. And, you know, it's stuff that would probably blow your mind. I mean, it might be stuff like, you know, DEI is like like an analysis, just an analysis of our history. One thing that shocked me, I used to think that, you know, it was kind of overblown, and, you know, a lot of these debates were about like 10, you know, gay lifestyle books. And then you see it's every book about American history. I mean, they claim these things of books about slavery. We had slavery in this country. That was the original sin. We're still dealing with the aftermath of slavery. Anybody
One
who
of the
doesn't
books
know
was
that,
called ABC of Equality. That's
how
all
can
it
you
was
not
called.
be how can you not be an educated
What?
person in this country, an educated person in this country, and not know about slavery, Reconstruction, what happened, racially in this country? It's just astonishing. Anyway, the federal judge ordered that they put the books back. At least it was an interesting decision because I guess there were only certain books or certain libraries. So the judge limited it to the certain books and the certain libraries. But there'll be follow-up lawsuits that say no, other books really by the same reasoning they should be put back, and they should be put back at all of these Department of Defense libraries.
Quickly, David Katz, in Arizona, the AG is suing to force House Speaker Johnson to seat Democratic elected by quite a large margin, Representative Grijalva. Can you speak to this case and this lawsuit?
The reason this one matters so much is that she'll be the vote that's needed for the discharge petition on the Epstein files. So with her vote, there'll be enough to have the House pass a bill that says, Department of Justice, you must discharge these, discharge the petition that says you have to. Now, will Trump find a way to prevent that? But at least we'll see. In other words, once they do the discharge petition, Mark, we'll see all the ways that Trump, Bondi, and Todd Blanche, Kash Patel at the FBI, how they try to thwart it, how they try to play games with it. And that is one thing that actually enlivens the MAGA base to sort of understand that, Trump, Patel, that these are not good people. These are not what they thought they were electing. So it'll make them play a lot of games. And she's the 218th vote. I think that's the amount that they need. And she is that vote. They haven't shaken anybody from their position, so she'll be that vote. So he wants to delay her, the speaker, as long as he can. So she finally said, they have protests back there that say, swear her in, swear her in. The speaker's not swearing her in. And so there's a lawsuit that's now been filed. I think the lawsuit's overdue. I think it should have been filed the first week that
Sure.
the speaker didn't swear her in. And I think that it's meritorious because they now don't have any representation. There's a properly elected person. There's an idea everyone's supposed to have representation. There's 800,000 people in each congressional district, and they elect somebody under their state procedures. She's been elected under their state procedure. It's a ministerial duty of his to swear her in, and that district now doesn't have. Someone said taxation without representation. They do.
Sure.
They do. They're like
Yeah.
the colonies, right? They got to pay taxes in that district in Arizona, and their representative won't be seated by the opposing party. I think she'll win that lawsuit.
The ruthlessness of the GOP is something on display in a way that we typically, I think, haven't seen in politics across the board on issue after issue, and this is one more way in which they're ruthless. David, thank you for hanging out. Again, you can find him on News Nation tomorrow. He's doing a big News Nation thing that he does on News Nation. He's an analyst. It's a big. He's a big deal. He's a big. I get it. I get it. Yeah, we're kind of like. I feel like we're the rehearsal for like when you go on News Nation. I got.
Not true. News Nation's getting more audience, so it's like you, Mark. It's growing. It's becoming more popular. So why not be part of it?
No, absolutely right. I'm only giving you a hard time. So I'm excited to see that. And of course, you can find him here on Thursdays. Katz, you're wonderful. And we so appreciate our time with you. Have a great week and break your leg tomorrow on News Nation and across the English-speaking world as we see you on more and more outlets that appreciate your great legal analysis. Appreciate it, pal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to be with all you guys.
All right. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.